The boy had $43. He had counted it 3 times that morning, sitting on the edge of his bed with his sneakers already on and his coat already zipped, because his mother always said that a number didn't become real until you had confirmed it with your own hands twice, and then once more, for honesty. The money lived in a folded envelope that his grandmother had pressed into his palm at the kitchen table the night before, telling him it was for something good, not just something fun. He was 9 years old. He understood the difference. His name was Marcus, and it was the Saturday of his birthday weekend, and his mother had promised him the downtown music district, which was 6 blocks of converted brick buildings and old loading docks, where artists sold paintings on folding tables and musicians set up on the corners, and the whole place smelled like roasted nuts from the cart near the fountain. Marcus had asked to go there instead of the usual birthday dinner because he had decided at some point in the past year that music was the thing he cared about more than anything else, more than his tablet, more than the game console his cousin had, more than the sneakers the other boys at school collected. He had a small keyboard in his room that his mother, Denise, had bought from a church rummage sale for $12, and he played it every evening after homework with a focus that made Denise stop in the doorway sometimes and just watch him. Something tightening in her chest that she could not fully name. Denise worked the early shift at the call centre on the north side, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when the overtime was available. The pay was not generous. The bus ride was 40 minutes each way. She had raised Marcus alone since he was 4, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator knocked through the winter nights, and the hallway light had been out for 3 months because the building manager was slow about things that didn't affect his own floor. She had given Marcus music lessons for exactly 8 months, 2 years before this birthday, until the lesson money had to go toward the deductible on her car when the transmission went. She had told him they would start again when things settled. Things had not yet settled. Marcus had not complained once. He knew about the $43. He knew his grandmother had put a 20, a 10, a 5, 5 singles, and 3 ones into the envelope, and he had counted it until those numbers felt like a song he had memorized. They took the bus downtown that Saturday morning in November, Denise in her good coat and Marcus in the green jacket she had bought him a size too large so he'd grow into it. The sky was the colour of old pewter, and the air had a cold edge that smelled like rain coming, and Marcus walked with his envelope in his jacket pocket, one hand pressed against it through the fabric. Not because he was afraid of losing it, but because the feel of it was part of the day. The music district was louder and more alive than Marcus had expected. A brass quartet was set up outside the old theatre, 4 men in matching hats, and a woman with a cello was positioned near the fountain. And down past the coffee shop there was a teenage girl with a violin, who played with her eyes closed, and a small handwritten sign at her feet. Marcus stopped at each of them. He watched with a concentration that seemed to belong to someone much older, tracking the hands, the breath, the small adjustments of the body. Denise watched him instead of the musicians. They were turning the corner past the restored red brick building that anchored the west end of the block, the one with the tall arched windows and the bronze lettering above the entrance that read Caldwell Hall, when Marcus stopped. There was a man sitting on a wooden stool near the building's service entrance. He was not in a good spot for it, not a corner or a doorway with natural gathering energy, just a plain stretch of sidewalk with foot traffic passing at a distance. He was playing an upright bass, which was an unusual instrument for a street corner, large and dark varnished, and he played it without a case open in front of him and without a sign. He wore a grey wool coat that had seen better years and a dark knit cap pulled low, and his face was lined and calm, and he played as if he were the only person in the entire city. Marcus stopped walking. Denise felt it before she understood it, the way the boy beside her simply ceased to move forward, the way the tension in his small arm changed. She looked at him, then at the man. The man was playing something Marcus did not have a name for. It was slow and low and had a kind of aching weight to it, the notes spaced like sentences in a conversation where the most important things were being said between the words rather than in them. Marcus had been to concerts exactly twice in his life, both times at his school gymnasium, and nothing he had heard there had sounded like this. He stood on the sidewalk and listened, and felt something shift inside his chest that he also did not have a name for. There was no cup in front of the man, no hat, no phone propped for tips. Marcus looked at his mother. Denise saw something in his face and understood immediately what it meant, and she felt the familiar pull of wanting to protect him from the lesson that sometimes kindness goes unacknowledged. But she also saw the certainty in his expression, and she had learned years ago not to stand between Marcus and a certainty. He reached into his pocket and took out the envelope. He crossed to the man and stood at a respectful distance and waited until a natural pause came in the music. The man lifted his eyes without lifting his bow. He had dark, watchful eyes, the kind that took in more than they let back out, and he looked at Marcus with a steadiness that did not make the boy feel small. "This is for you," Marcus said. He held the envelope out. "You play really well. I wanted you to have it." The man looked at the envelope, then at Marcus, then at Denise, who had followed and stood a few feet back. "That's your money," the man said. His voice was low and unhurried. "It's my birthday money," Marcus said. "I want to give it to you. My grandma said it was for something good." A long moment passed. A city bus sighed past on the street behind them. The man reached out and took the envelope, not with the brisk motion of someone accepting something owed, but carefully, the way you accept something fragile. "Thank you," the man said. He held Marcus's gaze. What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus!" He said it once as if he were placing it somewhere. "I'm Ray." Marcus nodded. Ray set the envelope on the sidewalk beside his stool, on top of his instrument case, and picked up his bow again. He played another 4 or 5 minutes while Marcus stood and listened, and then Ray stopped, set the bow across his knee, and asked Marcus if he played. Marcus told him about the keyboard, the $12 keyboard from the church sale. He said it without embarrassment, stated it the way his mother had taught him to state facts, because a fact is just the shape of the truth, and there is no shame in a shape. Ray asked him if he could read music. Marcus said no, but that he was learning from videos. Ray nodded slowly. He asked Marcus what he wanted to do with music, and Marcus said he wanted to understand it, all of it, every instrument and every kind, and Ray was quiet for a moment before he said, "That was a good answer." "The right answer," he said, was almost never. "I want to be famous." Denise was watching from the sidewalk with her hands in her coat pockets. She did not interrupt. Ray reached into the breast pocket of his grey coat and produced a small card. It was plain white with a phone number and a first name on it. No address, no title. He held it out to Marcus. "You bring that keyboard to this address next Saturday morning," Ray said. He added an address that Denise could hear, a street she knew in the Garland district. "I'll give you an hour." Marcus took the card. He looked at it and looked back at Ray. "For free?" Marcus asked. Ray almost smiled. "You already paid." They left Ray on his stool with his bass and his grey coat and the envelope Marcus had given him. Marcus held the card in both hands as they walked back into the stream of the music district. Denise read the address over his shoulder and said nothing for half a block. Then she said, quietly, that they would think about it. Marcus said, "Okay." He had the look on his face of someone who had already decided. That evening, while Marcus was in his room at his keyboard, Denise looked up the address Ray had given them. It was not a music school. It was not a teacher's home studio. It was a registered business address in the Garland district, and when she put the name and address together and searched more carefully, she found a reference to a company called Regal Sound Group in a 3-year-old article about a development project. The article mentioned the company's principal in passing, a man named Raymond Caldwell. She stared at the screen. She looked at the article again. She went and stood in the doorway of Marcus's room. He was picking out something by ear, slowly correcting himself, picking it out again. The small plastic keyboard made a thin, earnest sound in the lamplight. She did not say anything. She went back to the kitchen and read the article twice more. What she did not know, not yet, was the full shape of what Marcus had stumbled into on that November sidewalk. She knew the name Caldwell. The bronze letters above the entrance to Caldwell Hall had been in the city for 14 years. But she had not connected the name on the card to the name above those letters, had not understood that Raymond Caldwell had built that concert hall, had not known that Regal Sound Group controlled 4 performance venues in the metro area and had recently acquired a 5th. She had not known that Ray had a practice she could not have guessed at. When he needed to think through something difficult, he took his upright bass to a sidewalk in whatever neighbourhood his mind was in and played until the noise in his head settled. He had been doing it since he was 26 years old. He did not put out a cup. He did not want money. He wanted only to play where real people walked by, because a concert hall, he had said once in an interview Denise would later find, had a way of separating a musician from the very people music was supposed to reach. The $43 sat in the breast pocket of his grey coat. He had not opened the envelope that afternoon. He had opened it that evening, alone in his office on the 14th floor of the building above Caldwell Hall, and he had found the 20, the 10, the 5 singles, and the 3 ones, and he had sat with it for a long time. He thought about the boy's face, the steadiness of it, the way the boy had waited for a pause in the music before speaking, the way he had stated his gifts simply, without performance, and the way he had listened for those last 4 minutes with his whole body still and his eyes clear and serious. Ray had no children. He had been married once, briefly, in his 30s, and the marriage had not survived the years he spent building what he was building. He had no family nearby. He had colleagues and employees and contractors and a lawyer and an accountant and a board of directors for the foundation arm of Regal Sound Group. But the people in his life had a way of wanting things from him, specific and known things, and the boy, Marcus, had wanted nothing except to give something away and then to stand still and listen. He sat in his office for a long while with the envelope open on the desk in front of him. The bills laid out in a row the way the boy had presumably arranged them. He had learned in his 20s that you could understand a person by what they were careful with. Marcus had been careful with the money, had carried it in his pocket all morning and counted it and confirmed it, and then he had given all of it away in a single, clean motion, without holding back a dollar for himself, without asking for anything in return. $43. Every cent. He called his program director, a woman named Phyllis, the following morning. He told her he wanted to set up a tutoring session at the Garland studio on the coming Saturday. She asked what instrument. He said keyboard, beginning level, age 9. She asked who the teacher would be. He told her he would do it himself. Phyllis had worked for Ray for 11 years. She paused for exactly 2 seconds before she said she would arrange it. The following Saturday, Denise drove Marcus to the Garland district because she was not putting her 9-year-old on a bus with a keyboard to meet a stranger, regardless of what her searching had turned up. She had told Marcus this, and Marcus had said that was fair. She had also told herself that if anything about the building or the man felt wrong when they arrived, they would leave. She had the address pulled up on her phone, and she drove with a careful attention, and when they turned onto the Garland block and she saw the building, she slowed the car. It was a low, wide brick building with large windows and a plain painted sign above the entrance that read, Regal Sound, and through the windows she could see the dim shapes of recording equipment and a reception desk. There was nothing threatening about it. There was a parking space directly in front. They went in. A woman at the desk, middle-aged, unhurried, said that Mr. Caldwell was expecting them and led them down a short hallway to a room with a well-lit piano, 2 chairs, and a music stand. The keyboard Marcus had brought, wrapped in his bedsheet and carried against his chest, was clearly not what belonged in this room, but no one said anything about it. The studio piano was a dark upright, older but well-tuned, and the room smelled faintly of rosin and old wood, and the work lights gave everything a warm yellow cast that made the space feel less like a business and more like a place where something real happened. Ray was there already, sitting in one of the chairs in the grey coat from the week before. No bow in sight. He stood when they came in. He shook Denise's hand and looked at Marcus with the same steadiness as before, and he said, "Let's see what you've got." Marcus unwrapped his keyboard and set it on the music stand because there was no other flat surface at the right height, and the stand tilted slightly under the weight, and Marcus steadied it with one hand and looked at it and looked at the piano. Ray said to use the piano. He said the keyboard was for home. Marcus sat at the piano bench and placed his hands the way the videos had taught him, which was not quite right, and Ray moved his hands without comment and said to play whatever he knew. Marcus played the melody he had been working on, the one with the low aching spacing, and played it the way he always did, from memory and by feel, his face serious and inward. When he finished, Ray did not say anything immediately. He sat beside Marcus on the bench, which surprised Marcus because the bench was not wide, and he played the same melody back, note for note, and then showed Marcus where the hand had been reaching instead of settling, and the difference in sound was immediate and specific. Marcus played it again. Ray listened, then made one adjustment to the angle of Marcus's right wrist, a small physical correction that he made by simply moving the wrist into position rather than describing it. Marcus played it a 3rd time and heard the difference himself, and he looked up. "There," Ray said. Denise sat in the hallway on a wooden bench with a cup of coffee Phyllis had brought her and her phone in her lap, not really looking at the phone. She could hear through the closed door the thin sound of Marcus's keyboard first, which he had set aside after a few minutes by the sound of things, then the deeper sound of the studio piano, Ray's hands running something through quickly, then Marcus's hands on the same thing, slower, finding it, Then silence. Then Marcus playing the same phrase differently. Then Ray's voice, low and steady, one sentence, and Marcus playing it again. The hour stretched to 90 minutes. When the door opened and Marcus came out, he was carrying the keyboard, and his face had a look Denise had not seen on him before, a look of someone who had just been given a set of tools they had not known they needed. Ray walked out behind him. He told Denise that Marcus had a good ear and better discipline than most adults he'd worked with. He said that without inflating it, the way someone states a fact. Denise thanked him. She said she hoped they hadn't imposed. Ray said they had not. He offered Marcus the studio on Saturday mornings. He did not frame it as a favour, and he did not linger inside the offer, did not open a space for negotiation or for elaborate gratitude to fill. He said there was a piano in that room that didn't get used on Saturday mornings, and a boy learning by ear off $12 keyboard videos was a waste of potential the city couldn't afford. He said Marcus could come every week through the spring, and if Marcus wanted to keep going after that, they would figure out what that looked like. He said it the way he said most things, as if the matter were simple and the logic were plain, and then he waited. Denise looked at him. She had spent the 90 minutes on the hallway bench thinking about this possibility, running the calculation the way she ran every calculation that mattered, in the small, careful arithmetic of a woman who knew exactly how much air was between her and the next thing going wrong. She had identified what she could offer and what she could not. She had prepared herself to ask about cost, and had prepared herself to decline if the number was something she couldn't manage. The outer limit she had landed on without pulling something else out of shape was $40 a week. She had run that math on the bus that morning and run it again on the bench. Ray seemed to read this in her face, the quiet calculation running behind her expression. "There's no charge," he said. "He already paid." She recognized the phrase from what Marcus had told her about the sidewalk. She understood it was not a joke. She said, yes. Marcus came every Saturday for the rest of that winter and into the spring. He came with his small keyboard in the first weeks, and then Ray arranged for him to use the studio piano full-time, and the keyboard sat in its case in the corner of the lesson room. Marcus moved from the plastic keys to the piano bench with the natural ease of someone moving from a narrow path to a wide road. Phyllis brought him juice boxes and crackers and treated him with the matter-of-fact warmth of someone who had been told to look after this child and had decided she liked the assignment. She learned that he preferred apple over grape and that he would not eat crackers if they were broken, which made her smile without showing it, because picky about crackers seemed right for a boy this focused on everything else. Ray taught him in the way of someone who had been taught well himself, not by making the lesson about the teacher, but by pointing the student toward the music and then getting out of the way. He taught Marcus how to read a staff in the first 4 weeks, which no YouTube video had managed. He showed him the architecture of it, the way 5 lines held a world's worth of sound organized into something the eyes could follow. And Marcus studied the blank staff the way he had studied the envelope of money, wanting to understand the system before trusting it. Once he understood it, he moved quickly. Ray taught him about intervals in the 6th week and about the way a chord wants to resolve in the 8th, and Marcus took these things and turned them over as he sat with them, making them real through the kind of patient repetition that most children his age could not sustain. He practiced between Saturdays on the church sale keyboard with a focus that the thin plastic keys could barely contain. Denise would hear him from the kitchen some evenings, the same 4 bars played 20 times in a row, each time fractionally cleaner, and she would stop washing the dishes and just listen. In February, Ray asked Marcus to try composing something short, a melody of his own using the intervals they had covered. He told him to bring it the following Saturday. Marcus spent the week on it the way he spent the envelope money, seriously and with care. And when he played it for Ray on Saturday, it was 9 bars long and had a small mistake in the 5th bar that Marcus had not heard until Ray played it back to him. Ray did not correct the mistake first. He said, "That's a complete thought. Where did it come from?" Marcus said he had been thinking about the way the bass had sounded on the sidewalk in November. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said they should fix the 5th bar. And they did. Denise drove him every week. The drive was 22 minutes each way. She rearranged her Saturday schedule to make it work, shifting the grocery run, sometimes skipping her own lunch to keep things straight. She was aware of what was happening and deeply, specifically grateful for it. And she was also careful. She was careful because she was a woman who had learned to hold good things gently, because good things had a way of being temporary, and she did not want Marcus to learn the crash if this particular good thing did not last. In April, Ray invited Marcus to a rehearsal at Caldwell Hall. He told Denise on a Saturday morning as she was picking Marcus up, mentioned it the way he mentioned most things, directly and without performance. He said the hall was hosting a youth orchestra showcase in May and the rehearsals started in 3 weeks, and he thought Marcus should see a full orchestra at work, not as a player, just as a listener. He said it would be useful. Denise said she would talk to Marcus. Marcus said yes before she had finished the sentence. She had been inside Caldwell Hall twice, both times for events she had attended with her mother years before the current financial season of her life. She knew the hall the way most people in the city knew it, which was from the outside, from the bronze letters above the entrance, from its reputation as the kind of place where tickets started at $60. She had not known who owned it. They arrived on a Tuesday evening in late April. Denise in the good coat and Marcus in a button-down she had ironed that morning. Ray met them in the lobby. In the lobby of his own hall, he looked different than he did in the studio or on the sidewalk, not larger exactly, but settled, the way a person looks in a place that has their name on it. He shook Marcus's hand the way he always did, as if the handshake were a small formal acknowledgement of something, and he led them into the main hall. Marcus stopped at the threshold. The hall was arranged for rehearsal, which meant work lights and empty seats and music stands in clusters, and a conductor at the front with a clipboard. But even in rehearsal configuration, the room had a scale and a weight that Marcus had not prepared for. The ceiling was high and curved in a way that made the air feel different, held differently, and the stage was wide and lit with warm amber work lights, and the orchestra was settling in. 100 musicians in various stages of tuning and preparation, and the sound of it, the random aggregate of warming up, was nothing like music and also entirely like music. And Marcus stood in the doorway and did not move. Ray stood beside him and said nothing. What Marcus did not know, standing in that doorway, was that the hall he was looking into had been built on a specific idea that Ray had held for 20 years. Ray had grown up in a neighborhood 3 miles from where Marcus lived. He had learned to play bass in a church basement when he was 11, from a man named Theodore who had charged nothing and expected everything. He had played his way out of that neighborhood and into a music program at the state university on a partial scholarship that he had supplemented with work study and weekend gigs, and he had built his career from that foundation with a patience and a discipline that had taken 30 years to produce the thing he now stood inside. The hall bore his family name because his mother's name was Caldwell, and he had built it in her memory, and every program at the hall carried a small line on the back cover that read, "Theodore Jennings Education Fund," after the man in the church basement. He had never spoken about any of this to Marcus, and he would not speak about it that evening. He simply stood beside the boy in the doorway of the hall and let the room do what rooms of that size do to people who are ready to receive them. The conductor, a compact woman named Adaise, saw Ray from the podium and raised a hand. Ray raised his in return. He guided Marcus and Denise to seats in the third row of the house, and they sat, and the rehearsal began. Marcus watched for 2 hours without speaking. He watched the bowing sections and the woodwind players and the brass, and he watched Adaise's hands moving over all of it, and he watched the way 100 separate lines of sound were drawn into a single shape. And something was happening in him that Denise could feel sitting beside him, some reorganization of his understanding of what music could be, and therefore of what he was working toward. At the break, Ray came and sat beside Marcus. He asked what the boy was noticing. Marcus told him about the cellos, about the way their lines sometimes moved opposite to what he expected, and how that opposition was what made the top of the piece feel like it was lifted. Ray looked at him for a moment. "You should be playing," Ray said. Marcus said he didn't know how yet. Ray said that was what the next year was for. In the car on the way home, Denise was quiet for most of the drive. Marcus was quiet too, which was unusual for him after an exciting thing. Normally he talked all the way home. The quiet was a different kind. Not absence, but fullness. At a red light, Denise reached over and put her hand on the back of Marcus's neck for a moment, the way she had done since he was small. He leaned into it. She thought about $43. She thought about what her mother had said about the money being for something good. She thought about the sidewalk and the grey coat and the way Marcus had waited for a pause in the music before speaking, because that was how she had raised him, to hear the shape of a moment before entering it. She did not yet know all of it. She didn't know that the card Ray had given Marcus that day was the same card Ray gave to almost no one, that in 14 years of playing sidewalk bass in this city, he had given that card to exactly 6 people, and that every one of them had been a child who gave something without being asked. She didn't know that Ray's foundation had a fund set aside for exactly this purpose, for the child who showed up with the right kind of attention and the right kind of generosity and the wrong kind of access, and that the fund existed because Ray had been that child once, in a neighborhood 3 miles from here, standing in a church basement with nothing but time and a willingness to hear. She would learn these things over the following months in pieces, the way you learn the shape of a large thing by walking around its edges. She would meet Phyllis properly, not as a receptionist, but as the director of educational programming for the Regal Sound Foundation, and she would understand the full shape of what Phyllis organized. She would have a conversation with Ray in March where she asked directly about the terms of Marcus's access to the studio, because she was not a woman who let important things remain vague. And Ray would answer directly, in the way he answered all things, which was without decoration and without evasion. He would tell her about the Theodore Jennings Fund. He would explain what it had been created for and how it worked, and Denise would listen carefully and ask 2 questions, and Ray would answer both. She would sit in Ray's office one afternoon in September to sign the paperwork for the formal scholarship, the full Theodore Jennings Fund scholarship that covered instruction, instrument access, and a monthly stipend for materials. The office was plain and high and had windows that looked south over the city, and she sat across from Ray's desk and read the paperwork the way she read everything important, once for understanding and once for the details she might have missed. And then she held the pen and looked at the document and felt the weight of 9 years in that moment. 9 years of early shifts and 40-minute bus rides. 9 years of the radiator knocking and the hallway light that the building manager never fixed. 9 years of the $12 keyboard and the lessons that had stopped so the transmission could be paid for, and the promise that they would start again when things settled. Things were settling now, she thought. Not in the way she had imagined when she made that promise to herself, but settling nonetheless. She signed. She thanked Ray. He nodded in the way of someone for whom this moment was ordinary and important at the same time, neither above it nor diminished by it. She did not cry in Ray's office. She held everything level as she walked out of the building and got into her car and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. Then she cried briefly and completely, the way she had learned to do things over 9 years, with full attention and no audience. When she was finished, she dried her face and started the engine. Then she pulled out of the parking lot and drove to pick Marcus up from his Saturday lesson, which was already running long because Ray had started teaching him scales in 3 keys instead of 1. That Saturday in May, the Youth Orchestra Showcase at Caldwell Hall had a program change. Ray had arranged it 2 weeks in advance and told no one except Adaisy, who had agreed without hesitation. He had told Marcus a week before, mentioned it on a Saturday morning after the lesson, as if it were a small, practical matter. He said the showcase needed a student pianist as a bridge piece, and that Marcus's composition from February would work. He said it was 8 minutes of stage time. He said Marcus should wear his best shirt. Marcus had asked if his mother knew. Ray said she would find out when she arrived. At the end of the program, before the final piece, Adaise stepped to the microphone and announced that the hall would like to welcome a young musician from the youth training program to play a short original composition at the Studio Grand. She said the composer was 10 years old. Denise, in her seat in the 7th row, went very still. Marcus walked onto the stage of Caldwell Hall in his button-down shirt and his good pants. The stage lights were warm and amber, and they caught the dark finish of the grand piano and the careful way Marcus approached the bench. He sat down. He positioned his hands the way Ray had taught him, settled rather than reaching. He looked at the keys for one moment, not hesitating but gathering, and then he began. The hall was full. Denise sat in the 7th row in the good coat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on her son on that stage. And when he finished playing and the hall responded, she understood, in a full and certain way, that this was the thing her mother had meant when she pressed the envelope into Marcus's hand and said the money was for something good. Ray sat in the back of the house. He had come in late and taken a seat near the door, the way he did when he wanted to hear a room without being seen in it. When Marcus finished and stood from the bench and the house came up around the boys' single small performance, Ray sat quietly and let it happen. The $43 was still in his coat pocket. He kept it there. Not as a talisman or a sentiment, but as the kind of specific, concrete fact that a person with a long memory needs sometimes. The weight of a thing that has already been paid. After the showcase, in the corridor outside the main hall, Denise and Ray stood for a moment while Marcus was surrounded by the young orchestra musicians who wanted to know how old he was and how long he had been playing and who that was. Marcus answered each question with the same plain directness he had used on the sidewalk in November. Ray said to Denise quietly that Marcus would be ready for the youth ensemble audition in the fall. Denise said she hoped Marcus hadn't been any trouble. Ray looked at her. "He's been no trouble at all," he said. "He's been the point." She understood what he meant. She did not say so immediately. She stood for a moment in the corridor of Caldwell Hall with the warm noise of the evening around them, and then she said that she wanted to ask him something. She asked him why. Not why the scholarship, not why the lessons, but why he had been sitting on that particular sidewalk in November, playing his bass with no cup and no sign, as if he were playing for no one. Ray was quiet for a moment. He said he was playing for anyone who stopped. He said most people didn't stop. He said Marcus had stopped and had listened, and then had given away something real, and that those three things together were worth more than most people managed in a lifetime of trying. Denise nodded slowly. She looked toward the hall where her son was standing with a group of musicians, talking with his hands the way he did when he was animated. And she thought about the 63 seconds she had stood on that sidewalk in November debating whether to let her child give away his birthday money to a stranger. She was glad she had let him. Kindness, she thought, does not always know what it is doing. It does not need to. It moves forward on its own instinct through cold air and uncertainty. And it lands where it lands, and sometimes where it lands is exactly right, and the world that seemed to be set against you was in fact only waiting to see what kind of person you were. Marcus came out of the hall with his jacket over one arm and his face still lit from the stage. "Can we come back?" he asked. Denise said yes. She said they could come back as many times as he wanted. Ray said the hall was open to him. Marcus zipped his jacket and nodded as if this confirmed something he had already understood. Then he said he was hungry, which made Denise laugh, a real laugh, the kind that releases something, and Ray, standing in the corridor of his own hall with his hands in the pockets of his grey coat, allowed himself to smile. They went out through the tall, arched entrance together, into the November air, and the city continued around them, and Marcus walked between them with his hands in his pockets, and the lamp above the entrance cast a long, warm light down the front of the building, and the bronze letters above them caught it. He had given $43 to a man on a sidewalk. The man had given back a door.